Hey everybody, we're here at Amy Kurtz's book launch and book signing in New York City, and we ran into a former podcast guest, Ben Ahrens, who is the founder of Reorigin. So Ben, it's great to see you. If you can just say hello to everybody and give them an update where you've been since the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much. So honored to be here and running into these guys. I think we did the podcast about 2 years ago.
Yeah?
So Reorigin is thriving. We've got now members across 50 different countries. We've had about 12,000 members go through the program, and are getting ready to launch some new programs in women's health, menopause, symptom reducing around that. Things are continuing to grow there.
So if you could just quickly tell everybody what Reorigin is, in case they haven't watched that episode,
Yep.
And then who you are and how you got into this with your background. Just a quick couple of minutes, and then we'll jump into what you've been doing since the last episode that we're going to drop into the show notes of this interview right now.
Yeah, sounds good. So Reorigin is a neuroplasticity-based brain retraining program for people struggling with chronic conditions, which includes Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic pain, anything for which the brain plays a central role in sort of perpetuating inflammatory responses. And as we just saw tonight with the book, But You Look Fine, which is such a on-point title, I think. It sort of creates this syndrome where the brain becomes like this hammer looking for a nail. And even when the physical body starts to heal, the brain is still, or can still be, overactive to the point where it can increase inflammation, it can drop the immune system, and it can just fairly dramatically prolong the life of the illness cycle in ways that are very hard to understand for people who have not gone through it, or for even mainstream medical doctors that don't necessarily have this full contextual understanding, which includes the mind, the body, and the central nervous system that connect the two. So, I came to this through my own journey of Lyme disease. I was struggling with it for about 4 years, 3 years of which were incredibly severe, bedbound. I tried going the mainstream route. I did conventional antibiotics, intravenous antibiotics. I spoke about it now, I think over 10 years ago when I gave a TED Talk. And ultimately, the thing that really moved the needle, that helped me to heal, was learning to regulate my own nervous system, to calm that hyperactive threat response, and to sort of till the soil or set the conditions for the body to do what it would naturally do, which is to self-heal, but what it has sort of along the way, forgotten how to do. And so programs that do brain retraining, like the Reorigin program, are really aimed at sort of reminding the body, or retraining the brain and the body to do what they naturally do, which is really to self-heal.
So Ben, we talked about this offline, that you and I and Amy as well, we're all lifelong learners, and we've learned a lot since the last episode 2 years ago. So can you share with us what you've learned? Amy as well, that's right, she's behind us. And could you share with us what you've learned since the last podcast episode in the neuroplasticity and in the brain retraining space? I mean, you talked to me offline about some of these studies and how you're constantly staying on top of research. So share with our listeners the latest and greatest in the brain space with chronic Lyme disease.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, there's a lot more awareness about this. There's a lot more awareness of the role of the brain and central nervous system as sort of the underpinning and unifying cause in many ways, because I think the challenging part with these conditions is that you can have the same diagnosis that expresses itself 100 different ways in 100 different patients, which is hard for mainstream medical doctors to make sense of. On that same side, or the flip side of that, you can give patients with the same diagnosis, the same treatment, and they might respond 100 different ways. And so they're finding that for a variety of conditions, not all chronic conditions, but ones like those I mentioned, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, chronic pain, or central sensitization, as well as anxiety, in some cases depression, that there seems to be this sort of common theme or common root cause, which more and more practitioners and researchers are calling hypervigilance.
Yeah.
And so there is this sort of syndrome that happens when the brain reaches a certain, I like to think of it as like a critical mass of overwhelm. Normally we think of, and Amy mentioned it tonight, we think of trauma as like one acute thing that happens, one event, a car accident or a traumatic childhood experience, and that changes the brain and the way it processes information. And that's one way for trauma to take place. But another one is this sort of slow drip, insidious way where we might not even notice, in fact most of the time we don't, that it's happening, but over a period of weeks and months and years or decades in many cases, this threshold starts to build up, and we might feel fine to a point, but then it reaches this critical mass where something else comes along, a life event, a financial challenge, a breakup, a tick bite, a physical injury, an arm break or something, things that in and of themselves might not be sufficient to cause an entire dysfunction, but in the context of this overloaded brain and this overwhelmed nervous system, now all of a sudden it's sort of like the breaking of the dam, and people find themselves just stuck and spinning in this syndrome.
Well, let's talk more about hypervigilance, because when we talked last, I didn't understand it well enough, and I think you've learned a lot as well since then. When people talk to us all the time on this podcast, and they give us messages and DMs and emails and say, I can't treat Lyme disease because I'm so sensitive.
Yeah.
One of the things we've learned in your space is that when you're very hypervigilant, you're more sensitive to treatments. So can you share with us your thoughts on when you're in fight or flight and you're really in constant fight or flight, how that impacts your ability to react to treatments and potentially have a more severe Herx reaction to the treatment?
Yeah, so I just want to linger on one thing you said, which is more sensitive to treatments, but there's a difference that between sensitive in the sense of like more receptive to treatments versus sensitive more reactive to treatments.
Reactive specifically,
right.
yes.
So when that brain or nervous system has kind of reached that critical mass, it tilts over into what we know as fight or flight, or this sort of threat detection and response mode.
Yep.
At which point it tends to skew very, very heavily on the side of processing incoming information as threats. And some of that incoming can be treatments as well, things that are designed to help you, that are meant to help you, but that often contain something that can be challenging to the system, because treatments are, like a medicine is going to give you something that's beneficial, but it also, in a sense, it's changing something in your body, and the hypervigilant brain, the brain that's already overloaded, might experience that shift or that change that's happening as a threat. And when that happens, it's almost like the brain and body can kind of lock up and say, okay, this is not for me.
Yeah. So Ben, but talk to us about, in addition to somebody who's chronically ill, like a lot of our followers and listeners that are on this podcast right now, this is an important topic for people that are quote unquote healthy as well. Because if you are hypervigilant and you are in an overactive nervous system, you're more vulnerable and susceptible to a chronic illness because of that. It weakens your immune system, and it makes you more vulnerable to pathogens, even low virulent pathogens like Lyme disease, making you crippling and ill. So help us understand that bigger picture beyond people who are chronically ill and why it's relevant, but for everyday person walking this planet right now on this earth.
Oh yeah, I mean 100%. People might start to experience this, like I heard Amy a couple times use the term like waiting for the other shoe to drop. It's this sort of sensation that there's like an ever-present danger or an ambient emergency that's just out of reach. You can't necessarily put your finger on it. Might even be a feeling or a sense like, did I leave the coffee pot on? It's just like some nagging sensation that something isn't right.
Yep.
And you might not necessarily be in full-blown chronic illness. You might not necessarily ever get there, but if you find that that's happening to the extent that it's actually affecting your life, where you want to be focusing, you want to be present, you want to be, thinking about something that doesn't involve just a stream of worries and concerns. But if that's happening, then it could very well be this sort of hypervigilant brain syndrome that's happening under the hood, which again, there's a lot of interesting research coming to fruition that's showing that this seems to underpin a lot of these chronic conditions. Again, it's not that the overactive brain activity directly causes the condition, but it does set the stage or till the soil in such a direction that it makes it more probable.
Do you think hypervigilance and everything you're studying is equivalent and a one-to-one with medical trauma brain, as we heard tonight from Amy? Or do you think there's a little nuanced differences in both of those terms?
I think there's some nuance. I think there's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of overlap. I think specifically what Amy has coined and really hit on is this idea of a sort of hypervigilant brain that emerges as the result of being a bewildered patient who's gone through this process where no one is guiding it, no one knows what's going on, and you yourself are struggling to make sense of it. And that alone, that experience of being, of not knowing, of trying to find your way through, the brain doesn't respond well to uncertainty, right? Like, we have a very low tolerance to uncertainty. In fact, so much of what we try to do in our lives, in our modern society, individually and collectively, is stabilize an inherently unstable situation. And so when we don't know what's going on with ourselves, and when doctors, the providers who are meant to tell us what's going on, when they're stumped, that will create this sort of trauma brain or medical trauma brain, that she talks about.
So I can speak for myself. When I was really sick and I was in constant fight or flight, I couldn't read my body signals. And we touched on this a little bit offline as well. So it's hard to really know, am I in fight or flight? Am I somebody suffering from this? So for people listening that are questioning, is it me? I don't really know, I'm really sick. What are some simple things they can look for and reflect inwards on to determine, am I suffering from hypervigilance? And do I really need to take a training course like one of yours that you've created?
Yes, I think that's a great question. And there's something interesting called the Weber-Vechner effect, which is basically says that we have trouble hearing a certain signal if the noise floor is too high. And what that means internally is, our body is always sending us signals. A lot of those signals are a form of real intelligence that's, nudging us in a certain direction, but we have trouble hearing those because there's so much other noise in the system. And some of that noise can be mental and cognitive, can be the worries and the concerns. Some of it can be physical in the form of physically felt tension. But when that noise floor is ramped up, it's hard to sort of hear. So there are some basic practices of, breathing, meditating. Of course, when your brain is hypervigilant, very hard to meditate. So for that reason, I really advocate people start with things like, breath work or movement, very gentle movement. The way to answer your question that you can kind of determine if your brain is maybe tilted toward the scale of hypervigilance is if you do those things. Let's say you go for a walk in nature, you do something that at least for you can help induce you into a more calm state. But the moment you stop doing that, you're spinning again. That's a sign that your brain has changed in some way. The good news is, just because your brain changed, it can also change back, and you can be the one to initiate that change.
So Ben, we need to get you back on for a deeper interview, and we're going to get you in studio, and this
Awesome.
is perfect to do it here, but I want you to tease everybody listening about the book you're going to be launching in the coming future, and tell us about what inspired it, what's going to be it, and tease us a little bit about what's to come.
Yeah, so I can't say too much, but I will say that it has to do with a deep dive into research and look at this underpinning hypervigilance that seems to have skewed so many brains and nervous systems, in this direction that leaves us open to susceptibility to more illness and dysfunction. The beginning of the book is really just sort of putting a finger on what this is, sort of normalizing it throughout society, showing how widespread it is. But beyond that, the rest of the book is really a sort of roadmap. And what's emerged and what does emerge throughout the book is really a journey from hypervigilance to a state that's derived from martial arts, which is called relaxed readiness. And relaxed readiness is basically the ability to be fully present, fully available without being activated. It's what you and I spoke about a moment ago of having a sense of expanded capacity, where I think so many of us, whether we're ill or just overwhelmed, feel a sense of sort of contracted capacity and contracted attention. And ultimately where we want to be, what's better for our well-being, for our health, for our ability to be creative and to collaborate, is to be able to feel at ease, to feel fully present and alert but not tense. And when we can combine certain practices with awareness, with knowledge, the nice thing is that the same way the brain learns to overprotect, it can actually be retrained through conscious interventions to settle into this new set point so that it's a new default, this state I call relaxed readiness.
So Ben, I can't thank you enough on behalf of the entire Tick Bootcamp community for all you're doing, because you're helping people save their lives and get their lives back. And we're going to get you back on, and I just want to thank you again, man, and it's been great to see you again tonight.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks so much.